glorious sight of Mount Fuji overlooking the iconic Fuji International Speedway provides one of the most stunning backdrops in motorsports, and it was here where the 5th round of the Ferrari Challenge Asia Pacific took place over the weekend in Japan. With Ferrari owners driving to the track from across the country, the stage was set for another fantastic weekend in the sun for the popular and successful Ferrari Challenge Asia Pacific. The 4.5-kilometre track boasts one of the longest straights in racing, and as always, the Grade 1 circuit was in perfect condition. But with Ferrari GT driver and F1 legend Giancarlo Fisichella added to the mix as a guest racer, all the drivers had to be at the very top of their game. Max Blancardi had qualified in pole for the first race of the weekend, from Felipe Pret and Kato Gacci. But watch as Gacci's red car tumbles down the grid from third to end up in the middle of the pack. Pirelli Pro driver Blancardi maintained his position into the first corner, with Pret's white number 17 behind him, and Australian Steve Wyatt's red number 77 moving up into third. For the newcomers in the Copa Shell class, Gacci had qualified in a stunning third overall. But with him now out of contention, Indonesian David Jipto Biantoro led the category from Paul van Loenhout and Vincent Florendo. These three would tussle for the division lead throughout a fascinating race. Behind Blancardi at the front, the experienced Trofeo Pirelli drivers of Pret, Wyatt, Ringo Chong and local boy Hisao Shigeta eventually showed their quality to occupy the top of the leaderboard, overtaking some of the Copa Shell drivers who had qualified amongst them, despite racing in a supposedly lower class. But during the race, Jipto Biantoro ripped up the form book with this move on Ringo Chong, moving him up into the top 3, though a mistake on lap 9 would later see him fall back. As Blancardi started to ease away at the front, Pret and Wyatt were engaged in an almighty battle for second and were only separated by 0.2 of a second at the finish. With an enthusiastic crowd looking on, the drivers continue to excite and delight those watching, with a large field of 458 Ferrari Challenge racing around at top speed. One of the best battles involved that man Jipto Biantoro again, with him all over the back of number 73, Hisao Shigeta, but unable to find a way past. Meanwhile, Filipino driver Vincent Florendo was showing good pace just behind them, lapping Alan Liu, who had placed last of the 18 cars to complete the race. And the midfield battles continued throughout, with just 0.7 of a second separating the 3 cars ahead of Liu at the finish, proving that these drivers were scrapping to the very end. Blancardi came around to take the checkered flag, winning both the Pirelli Pro Division and overall honours, while Felipe Pret edged out Steve Wyatt in the Trofeo Pirelli, with Ringo Chong in third. Aussie driver Paul van Loenhout won the Copa Shell class, a fraction ahead of David Jipto Biantoro, with Vincent Florendo completing the podium.
It was a tough race because in the first lap, to try to do the best lap, I overheat my tire. But I have to push until the end because they were going very fast. The track is fantastic and the organization is also top.
It's fantastic. Great. When you finish first, it's always great. A difficult race, slippery at the end, and I finished the race good, in good condition.
Fuji track was fine. I race here normally with a GTR. This is my first time with the Ferrari. It was fantastic, and it's my first win for the season.
If the first race of the weekend was exciting, the second one was spectacular. More good weather blessed the drivers and spectators alike, as Ringo Chong started the race in pole position. He was followed by fellow Trofeo Pirelli driver Felipe Pret, with Copa Shell racer David Jipto Biantoro an impressive third on the grid, 4 places ahead of his nearest division rival, while Race 1 winner Max Blancardi was down in 5th. But all eyes were on Ferrari driver Giancarlo Fisichella, racing as a guest and starting from the back of the grid. Japanese driver Hisao Shigeta started from 6th, but quickly went past Blancardi ahead of him, though Blancardi soon retook the position in a ding-dong battle, and Shigeta would later slip down the order after falling off the pace. While the drivers fought it out in midfield, Fisichella started to make his way through the field. Having started from 22nd position, he was soon passing Ken Sito for 15th. Back at the front, Steve Wyatt had jumped ahead of Ringo Chong, but Chong was fighting hard to retake the position. Meanwhile, the Fisichella juggernaut rumbled on. Chong Hon-yun, aka the host of Top Gear Korea, was soon overtaken for 10th position, while Vincent Florendo was next on the Italians' hit list. Then came Lebanese driver Tani Hanna, who had started up in 7th spot before Fisichella set about cracking the top 5 with his unstoppable progress, passing Gipto Biantoro before sliding up behind Shigeta, ready to pounce. But as impressive as Fisichella was, his guest status meant his performance had no bearing on the overall series positions. The Copa Shell title was being keenly fought between Gipto Biantoro and Florendo, who would end up less than 4 seconds apart by the finish. Meanwhile, Fisichella's quest to go from last to first was nearly complete as he passed Ringo Chong, the man who had started in pole position. But by this time, Pirelli Pro driver Max Blancardi was out in front, with Pret and White close behind. Taiwan's Alan Lin's disappointing weekend continued as he spun out in the middle part of lap 11, shortly after posting his best lap time of the race, though he was able to rejoin the action. Fisichella's assault on the lead continued over several laps with his breathless move on Steve Wyatt. The Italian was sporting the number 458 on his car, and you'd be forgiven for thinking the high number represented his additional power over the field, rather than the model of the car that all the drivers were racing, both in Fuji and throughout this competitive season. Blancardi said after the race that it had been a pleasure getting on the same track as Giancarlo Fisichella, and he thanked Ferrari for the opportunity. But his graciousness had a touch of modesty about it, since he actually outpaced Fisichella over the final 2 laps and held the former F1 driver off with a 2-second cushion. With the final 2 rounds of the Asia Pacific Ferrari Challenge set for Sepang and Abu Dhabi in November and December respectively, Copa Shell driver Gipto Biantoro was keen to continue his streak of winning in every destination. Confirmation then of Blancardi's win in the Pirelli Pro classification, with Pret, White and Chong on the podium for the Trofeo Pirelli. Gipto Biantoro took Copa Shell honours for the 8th time this year, from Florendo and Van Lowenhout.
Philippe was very, very strong today. I was testing how fast he could go, but then I saw Fisichella was coming back, so I say, or I pass Philippe or he will catch me. So I forced a little bit, he let me pass, and I had enough space to control Fisico coming back, but he was under control, so nice race.
The second race more difficult than the first one. Much more difficult because I stay in front until the 12th laps. And after Max is more fast than me and I let him pass because we're not in the same category. I do my race to the end.
Good action, was a hard race to do. It's my first time here, crowd's been great, weekend has been great, the weather's been great, everything's been good.